Jack Doyle Podcast resumes here in the offseason. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Matt Taylor here with the great Jack Doyle, and we are here to talk about the latest with the Indianapolis Colts, even though we are in the offseason, and, we've got some, things to sift through. Some, we're going to lay Jack down on the emotional couch over here and try to work through his emotions with, unfortunately, the Colts missing out on the playoffs. And also, we're going to talk about the playoffs themselves. They've been incredibly exciting so far. Through one round with the wild card. The divisional round continues this weekend. But, Jack, how you been since the end of the season, man? I feel like I haven't seen you or talked to you, and I feel like we have this long-distance relationship that we have to catch up on.
Yeah, it's crazy. We take a week off, but luckily now that we're back together, we get to talk about a lot of football that's gone on the past 5 days or whatever, or this previous weekend. So it's good to be back.
Absolutely. So we'll talk about the fallout from the 8-9 season for the Colts. We'll react a little bit to what Chris Ballard and Carlie Irsay-Gordon, Colts owner and CEO, what they had to say last week regarding the current state of things and how the team progresses and the mindset they're going to have this offseason. And then we'll talk about just, what's out there for the Colts in terms of, the aggressive mindset that maybe they need to take to get things back on the right track. Free agency, what do they do with guys like Daniel Jones and Alec Pierce? So a loaded podcast per usual, but how you feeling about a week later, right? I mean, after the fallout from the season, the Colts lose week 18. Obviously, there weren't a whole lot of playoff ramifications surrounding that game, Jack, but unfortunately the reality is the Colts lose 7 straight to end the season, finish under 500 after a 7-1, 8-2 start. How have you, now that the dust has kind of settled on the season, how have you compartmentalized the season after about a week or so?
Yeah, you're thinking about it the past week, and you're trying to move on to the next season, and speaking from a player's perspective, when you have an end of a season like that, and then you feel like you start to move on, right? And then you start watching the playoff games, and it's like, oh, it comes all right back, man. We had that great start, and it kind of fell apart at the end, but yeah, it's tough when you're watching other football, but you try to move on and look in the mirror and reflect about things you could have done better personally to help the team.
Yeah. That's just it. Not to be too dramatic about it, but it is, if you don't mind me saying, it's a little bit of a depressing moment. That game was on Sunday. The very next day, we saw it this weekend, right? That the Jaguars lose, the Steelers lose the very next day. Yeah. Guys are inside the locker room with trash bags, and then they're cleaning out their locker, and they're answering tough questions, and they're talking about their futures with their current teams, or what if they're free agents, what life holds elsewhere in the NFL. To take us through that emotion of coming right back the very next day and having to do some really serious discussions and not having really much time to kind of let the dust settle on the conclusion of the season. Yeah,
no matter how many times you do that day, right? And everyone does that day except for one team, right? That's just the reality of what it is, and it doesn't get any less weird, right? It's a bit awkward. It's there's some emotions that come in there, and this team will never be together. There's guys that you just fought your tail off with for, the past 6 months or whatever, and you'll never, not that you'll never see them again, but possibly, right? You don't know if, you'll try to keep up, but, people's lives go on. So it's a very weird, it's a very weird feeling when you go to that locker clean out day, and then, the facility turns into a ghost town, and, people go back to their hometowns or whatever they're going to spend their off season. So it's a weird day. And and it just, it never becomes easy. That's for sure.
Maybe this is a silly question, but by rule, do you have to be out of there? Real quick?
Can
you not come back on Tuesday or Wednesday and get your stuff?
Yeah, you can come back, but the equipment guys, Frog over there and T, they're like, hey, we're cleaning out these lockers. They got to get the disinfectant out and wipe them all down. So you got to get everything out. No leaving stuff in. I'm like, I'm trying to tell Frog, Frog, I'm being here, work out. So no, get it all out. You can put it in here in a couple weeks, but. So, yeah, you can definitely be around. There's rules about, what you can do when you are around, right? And, we'll probably get into that as we, go through the off season. But yeah, it's time to clean out the lockers so they can, get a little refresh for you, get a refresh for the locker room, and everyone can kind of move on, and we start moving, getting ready for the next season.
But going along with that, last thing on just the halt of everything, and I think that's the right word. That's the word I've always used. It's just it just comes to a screeching halt. I mean, you're in this daily grind for 7 days a week for 5.5, 6 months, hopefully longer. And then all of a sudden it just stops, right? I mean, you see it from the player side. It's not nearly as intense for me, but it's from a broadcaster standpoint, there's always something to do. There's always the next game or the next show to do. And then it just stops. I mean, how tough is it to come to the realization that, like, the season is over, the grind is done, and now I don't really know what to do in the immediate future.
Yeah, it's especially those first couple seasons, because it's really a shock, because you come from college where, maybe you get a week or two off, and then you get right into the offseason program, and you're back to, having a schedule and someone telling you what to do.
Sure. Right?
But as an NFL player, that's on you. You got to figure out what you're doing until you come back for OTAs in April. You got to get yourself in shape. You got to get yourself ready to go. Yeah. So it is really weird, because, you're going through a season, you get in that routine, you get in the flow of the season, and things I think about is, like, you're eating meals with these guys every day, you're in meetings with these guys every day, and then it just, like you said, it just halts. Yeah, it stops. Done. Like I always said, the facility turns into a ghost town because there's no one here, right? And it's definitely weird, and it's a challenge for guys to find their new routine and what their off season is going to kind of look like, and making sure they're staying busy and getting their work in.
All right, so last week, we had some movers and shakers discuss the big picture fallout. I don't know if that's the right word, but, the 8-9 and the immediacy of, how things are going to look here for the Colts. So Carlie Irsay-Gordon, Colts owner and CEO, she meets with the media on Tuesday. Chris Ballard follows up on Thursday. But let's start first with Carlie, right? She was very upset, just talked about how frustrating it is to, have 5 straight years of missing the playoffs. And she used the word urgency, right? Or the phrase urgency has never been higher. Mm-hmm. So what did you take away from her main messages with the announcement that Shane Steichen and Chris Ballard are both coming back to lead in their respective positions?
Well, yeah, to kind of second what you said, Matt, I think you could feel her frustration throughout that whole press conference. And I also think she was direct in the word of the press conference was urgency, right? And that was her way of being direct, like, it's time to go, right? We've kind of, we've hit the lull of, not being in the playoffs the past 5 seasons and things like that. So, I think she was very direct in her message that, next year is the year, right? So let's go all chips in and let's move forward, right? And see if we can channel that hot start, right, and push that through a whole season.
Yeah, I mean, the reality is, as we all know, right? But just for context, Colts haven't won a division since 2014, haven't made the playoffs since 2020, haven't won a playoff game since 2018. There's been a boatload of, other teams around the NFL that have experienced success in some of those aspects. But the Colts now are tied for the 4th longest playoff drought in the NFL. I think it's the Falcons and the Jets and the Colts are the only teams that haven't made the playoffs since 2020. Right? So, again, urgency is going to be at the forefront of all of this, but the Colts are keeping the brass intact, Jack. So tell me, what are some things that lead you to optimism, right? What are some things that lead you to, all right, we've made this decision, why can things be turned around? Right, we've talked about the 8-2, 7-1 start. Tell me why that's more real than the fallout at the end of the season.
Well, yeah, I think the start is real, and I think that is the reason for optimism. And you look at the start, right, and the 8-2 start, and then your starting quarterback gets hurt, right, and we'll even go back to the fractured fibula, right. I mean, that coming off the bye, right, coming out of the trip and playing the Falcons, and Daniel came in, and was it the Kansas City game was that first game, and he was obviously hobbled and hurt, and he was battling for his guys to be out there, right? And whenever you never want to make the injury excuse, but there's something about when your starting quarterback gets hurt that it just, you try really hard as a team to not let it affect your mindset, to affect the way you play or the way you prepare or the way you approach a game, but it does. And Daniel, all we were talking about early in the season is his leadership skills and how he was carrying these guys and holding everybody accountable. So to lose a starting quarterback, man, that's just really it's really tough to battle through that. And again, the coaches, the front office, the players, they don't want to hear that excuse, but I can say it as a fan, and how much that can change the outlook of a team. So my thing about the optimism going forward is, think of these historic numbers we were putting up. This wasn't just like an 8-2 start where we were, scanning by and winning these close games, right? We were putting up numbers. It was like every week on this show, Matt, you were reading, this hasn't happened since 1960 in the modern NFL, right? Yeah. I mean, that's what it felt like every stat was. So that's my reason for optimism is the way, the way this team started and the way they were rolling. And then we got to figure out how to, finish games and finish seasons, obviously.
And so you're saying the 8-2 is more real than the 0-7?
Yeah, it's usually somewhere in the middle, right? And you can look at the schedule, right, and the teams we played early in the season versus the end of the season, and obviously we were playing a bunch of playoff teams there to finish the season. So it's always somewhere in the middle, right? Are we an 8-2? You got to beat the teams you're supposed to beat too, and that's what the Colts were taking care of, right? Yeah. And then you're playing, the way the schedule laid out, you're playing these tough teams when you're battling a bunch of injuries and lost your starting quarterback. You play your
toughest games of the season without your key players when you needed them the most.
Yeah, I mean that's reality, right? You don't want to be saying the injury excuse, and again, the coaches, the players, they don't want to hear that, right? And they don't want to make that excuse, but that's that was the reality of the situation.
But also, to be fair, good teams find ways to win those games,
and that's something
regardless of the personnel.
And I think you could hear that, and in Chris's press conference, and with Carlie that they don't want to make that excuse, right? That they want to find ways to build the depth and figure out ways to win these games late in the year.
All right, I do want to read you, for the audience, a quote from Carlie Irsay-Gordon when she's talking about the overall approach to building the roster going into next season. She said, "Last offseason, our dad challenged our entire organization to fix the issues preventing us from reaching the playoffs. Chris and his team responded by taking a different approach to building the roster." Mm-hmm. By the way, this is from the letter that she wrote on social media to the fan base. She goes on to say, "We were aggressive in free agency. We acquired a quarterback who helped lead our offense to a historic start, like you mentioned, and we found talent inside the draft, and we traded for a premier cornerback." So after reading all of that, right, you're nodding your head. I agree with it as well. But after last season, making all those moves and seeing those moves pay instant dividends at the beginning of the season, the first 10 games, before injuries really kind of derail things for the Colts, how aggressive of a mindset do you think the Colts are going to have this offseason with even more urgency, right? I mean, I think it's safe to say that, like, the urgency is boiling over right now. Like, this is the hottest stove possible within the franchise trying to make the playoffs.
Right. I think, like you said, and as to take Carlie's words, it's at an all-time high, right? I think we're going to see even more, right? And I think in free agency, this past offseason, you saw us trying to shore up the back end, right, on the defensive side of the ball. So my instincts tell me that, that's going to be the front end this free agency season. And I don't know how all the cap space works and all that fun stuff. That's for, Mike Bloom to figure out. Right. But it
Mr. Texas Instruments.
Yes, exactly. But yeah, I think Carlie's, like I said earlier, I think Carlie's message was very direct, and it was letting the fans know. And, I know she's, talking to Chris, personally and behind closed doors or whatever, but she's letting them know, like, this is how we want to build the team. This is what we want to go for. So I think fans should be excited and looking forward to the free agency season.
Again, I think we've talked about this on prior shows, but this is what we do. We lament things, right? We bring it back up just for the audience sake. I'm very much in the belief the Colts had a myriad of injuries on both sides of the ball. Most specifically, consistently for the entire season, they got their tails kicked in terms of injuries in the secondary.
Right.
I mean, we don't need to get into it, but my gosh, I mean, just every week someone else was having to be signed and guys are being elevated off the practice squad. I mean, so many different guys in and out of the lineup, key personnel, Charvarius Ward, Kenny Moore, and Sauce Gardner. But all of that aside, if Daniel Jones stays healthy and DeForest Buckner stay healthy, I think it's as simple as that.
Yeah.
Jack. I don't know if you agree, but if those two guys stay healthy for the majority of the stretch of the season where the Colts struggled, right, winning or losing 7 straight games to close the season, I don't know if they go undefeated, but I know they certainly don't go winless.
They go
if
three
those
and
two guys are healthy.
I say they go 3-4 at the least, right? And that probably puts you in the playoffs, right? That would put you in, depending on what games you win. I don't know. I'm trying to think of it in my head, but that probably puts you in a tie with the Chargers, and you win the tiebreaker.
Yeah.
You're in as the 7th seed,
or depending on who the team.
Yeah, if you've beaten the division teams, maybe it's them. Yeah, you might win the division. So it's So yeah, I agree, Matt. And again, like you said, we've mentioned this before, but you lose a leader and your quarterback, and Daniel means so much to this team, and you can. And the reason we know that is the way that not only Coach Shane talks about him, but the way the other players were talking about him all year.
Yeah.
I mean, this guy did everything the right way. He's first guy in. Awesome. I mean, he's just awesome. Right. And then I know DeForest, right, and the leader and the impact he has on. He had on me as an offensive player, and it just, is even more so for those guys on defense, having that veteran leadership and the way he can get after the passer. I agree with you, Matt. I think that, you take that 0-7 end, and again, if it's 3-4, you may feel like you're limping into the playoffs, but you're in the playoffs, right? And you get a chance, and you see the way these playoff games are going. Anything can happen. So, yeah, I agree with your, your thoughts on that.
Isn't it just funny? This is a complete sidebar, but isn't it funny? Like you look at the season in May, and you're like, okay, that's a win. That's going to be tough, right? I mean, who would have thought the Colts would have closed out the season against 6 straight opponents that won at least 11 games?
Yeah,
right. I mean, prior to a couple days ago on Sunday, when the Jaguars lost to the Bills, the Texans and Jaguars had won 17 straight games.
I mean,
I don't know what was more bizarre, the Colts losing 7 straight or those two teams turning into like the 07 Patriots.
Literally, like the two AFC South, your two AFC South division, rivals, whatever you want to call it.
It's just funny. Like we have to kind of like step
back and just look at it.
Let's let things play out in terms of like what we think are the most difficult parts of the schedule.
I mean,
you never know.
Watching that Texans-Steelers game on Monday night, and they were started 0-3. Like I forgot about that, and then they were just they rolled at the right time.
10 straight.
They rolled at the right time. It's like you said. It's funny when you look at it back in the off season in May, and you trying to map it all out. But we all have no idea what's going to happen and how this thing's going to shake out, and that's what makes the NFL the best.
Yeah, I mean, if you bet on the NFL, God bless you.
Yeah, call the hotline. Call the hotline.
We're gonna leave it right there. 1-800-9 with it. Right, that's the number. All right. So that was Carlie Irsay-Gordon. Chris Ballard spoke late last week on Thursday. Gosh, he covered the gamut, man. When he speaks, everything is covered. He spoke for about 40+ minutes and basically covered every inch of this roster. So what are the areas that Ballard said that need addressing on this football team heading into 2026, right? Because last year his famous line was, "We're not close."
Yeah.
Well, you missed the playoffs again this year with the same record. But the difference is you were, like you said, historically, offensively putting up some Star Wars numbers. You're 8-2, and he said we had at that point, right, coming off of the Germany game, which unfortunately was the last win of the season for the Colts. He said we were one of the top 4 teams in the NFL. It's hard to argue against that. So how do the Colts get significantly better this offseason, and what are those areas they really need to address?
Yeah, I think Chris, the thing that kind of caught my attention in Chris's press conference was him saying, getting younger and faster on defense, right? And and I think what comes with that is depth, right? And having young guys who can plug and play and come in and be a difference maker, right? When they're asked to step up, because like we've talked about, we're not trying to blame the injuries, but injuries are the injury rate in the NFL is 100%. That's what they tell us as players when we first show up. So you got to prepare for it. But yeah, that definitely caught my attention in Chris's message and saying he wants to get younger and faster on defense, and it'll be a tough offseason for Chris, right? And a challenging offseason for Chris is what I'm seeing coming up, and but I'm also excited to see the moves him and his team kind of make.
Well, let's pick up there because the Colts do have some big decisions to make.
Yeah.
Some personnel calls, right? Especially along the defensive line. Kwity Paye, Tyquan Lewis, Samson Ebukam. These are all guys who are going into free agency. Unfortunately, the Colts kind of finish right in the middle of the pack in terms of sacks. And I know, the overall grade of a defensive line shouldn't be solely based on just how many sacks you have, right? There's so many other things that go into it in terms of impact and, did you force an early throw and things like
freeing
that.
up a linebacker. There's all kinds of stuff.
I think there's a lot of nuance to it. But, the Colts also have some guys that have been here a while on defense, some core players. DeForest Buckner's been here a while. Kenny Moore has been here since 2017. Zaire Franklin's been here since 2018. Grover Stewart since 2017. I mean, these are all really good players.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Jack, they don't have a whole lot of postseason. Well, first of all, they don't have a whole lot of postseason experience to show for it. They certainly don't have a whole lot of postseason success to show for it. So when Chris says we got to get younger and faster, where do you think he specifically means that within the three levels of the defense?
Yeah, as we kind of, mentioned early on in seeing how, in free agency last year, I feel like we attacked, the back end of the defense, I'm thinking corners, safeties, that type, and signing some big name guys. And so, my instincts are telling me, that's going to be at the front end this year, right? And at the D-line level and the linebacker level. So, like I said, it'll be interesting to see. And defense is, obviously, I'm always biased toward the offense, but watching a great defense, right? You need young guys who can run with a mix of the veteran guys, right? Again, I'm talking about the Monday night because watching this Texans defense, right? I mean, if you just trust me, I do not like the Texans, right? It's hard for me to watch. But watching the way DeMeco Ryan gets those guys ready to play and the way they play football, and they have a great mix of veteran guys, right, with a bunch of young guys who can run and tackle, right, and that's that's a blueprint for defense, in my opinion, and having that mix of veteran leaders who can diagnose plays and get guys lined up and get you in the right spot, but also having the speed. I keep saying young guys, but just having the speed and the ability to get after the quarterback to make it challenging on him. I think that's where we see we say the sense of urgency. That's where we see the urgency on that side of the ball.
With us staying on defense right now, I mean, as we're taping this right now, Lou Anarumo, kind of a hot name, interviewing for some head coaching jobs. I think Tennessee and the Giants, we'll see how that goes, right? And rightfully so. I mean, this guy's a really good football mind. He's been in the interview cycle, if you want to call that, for the last couple of years before he came over to the Colts as a defensive coordinator. All those great successful years with the Cincinnati Bengals, taking them to AFC Championship games and the Super Bowl. But again, I know you mentioned the injuries, but this is going to be probably a really difficult question to answer, and I apologize for that. But how do you think? What overall grade would you give the defense this year, right? Because it's kind of hard to tell because it's kind of an incomplete grade because of guys who were in and out of the lineup and they played a majority of the season without guys they were really counting on, in preseason and training camp.
Yeah, and Coach Lou, I remember, when he, came over as the defense coordinator, and I think it was the guys in Cincinnati who's called him, the mad scientist, right? And we saw that early in the season. I'm thinking back to that first game in Miami and just watching how Tua was so confused with how, they were changing schemes and rolling coverages and at the snap of the ball. And I think, again, as the injuries kind of happened in the back end throughout the season, that kind of limited all the stuff they could do on the back end to be multiple and giving different looks and that's what Coach Lou's scheme is. That's what that's what he's built on. He's built on confusing you on the back end and then getting after you up front. So. Again, like you said, Matt, it is a tough question to kind of just give an overall grade because it was, it was a roller coaster, right? It was up and down. You have the great defensive effort there in Seattle at the end of the season. It's like, oh yeah, here they are, right?
Yeah.
This is
the
who
49ers game the next week.
Yeah, it's like that's who you saw early in the season, and then you just didn't have the consistency that you have to have in NFL, right? As a player, as a team, as a coach, you need consistency, or you'll get exposed, if you're not carrying it over from week to week. So it's tough to give it an overall grade. Again, with how it kind of the fluidity of how the season went.
Sure.
But yeah, it's going to be a challenging offseason is what I think of when I think of all those things.
You mentioned the Miami game, week 1. I mean, I'll go back even further than that. I mean, the first day of training camp.
Yeah.
And probably most specifically the first day of full pads at training camp, watching aesthetically how this defense was going to play. And you had for the most part, all of your guns then, right? You had Buckner and Justin Wally.
Yeah,
Wooler.
I just thought when you said the first, practice of training camp,
Yeah.
I thought of that Justin Wally, how great of a camp he was having, and again another injury.
I got
that-
excited. I'm like,
yeah.
holy smokes, this looks way different than what we're used to. So generally speaking, what changes were the Colts forced into because of personnel? You're right. I think the way to describe it would be, and maybe you don't agree with it, but they were just way less. I think for the common fan to understand it, they were way less game specific than they wanted to be because of the personnel.
Yeah, they were more simple, right? And because you don't, when you're doing all that, rolling coverages and you're showing pressure over here and then you're bringing over here, that's really challenging on the defense, right? And you all got to play as one. You got to be on the same page. And, you got Cam Bynum back there trying to direct everybody. He's kind of the quarterback of how they're kind of rolling and doing different things. So, as a coach, you have hesitation to do that with guys who haven't practiced it, right? I mean, that's, anyone's coached their, youth sports or whatever. And it's like, you're going to do things that you practice, right? And so not having the experience with those guys and again, not being able to, this is not the guys we had in training camp who were out there a lot of times. So yeah, just not having the reps of doing it, makes you hesitate to get into all that complex schemes and things like that. So you don't have guys running free, right? And so yeah, that's kind of how it all went down.
And this is not a shot at these guys, but I mean, guys like Jonathan Edwards, Mekhi Blackman, Cameron Mitchell, these guys I think are going to be great players.
Yeah.
And they fought their tails off.
Right.
But did it boil down to like a lack of trust?
Yeah. That's nothing against those guys.
Right.
That's just, coaches will do and play who they trust, right?
They're not guys like Gardner, Ward.
That have experience, right? And have been in the NFL and have, been through, and a lot of guys who went through training camp, Mekhi Blackman, he came.
He's with the Vikings.
He came in the week 1 or something like that, right? I can't remember exactly when it was, but it is like coaches are going to do and they're going to call what they trust, right? That's just how they're built, and that's just the way football goes. That's just the way sports goes.
Yeah. All right, you mentioned the defensive line. Last thing on the defense. Again, we'll see what happens with some key free agents up front. Most notably, Kwity Paye, right, who is an in-house guy drafted in the first round. There's some tough calls there. How do the Colts, big picture question, how do the Colts address that in a major way, and they don't have a first-round draft pick as of right now? So, this is kind of a hypothetical, but how do you – because that's a premium position, right? And it takes first-round capital to draft impact players at those spots. Is it going just nutso overboard in free agency? Like, how do you address that in the offseason without a first-round pick?
It might have to be. Go nutso, as you said, Matt, in free agency. It's just, like you said, it's a premier position, and I just see how much it changes a game, right? And again, maybe I'm speaking, from a tight end's perspective, and how much I hated or dreaded when you had a guy out there and going to block him. And then even I wouldn't have to pass block them very often because that would be bad coaching. But having to they'd be like, oh yeah, Jack, chip him on your way out. So then it's messing up my route, right? And then I'm not, there's so many things those guys just disrupt a game, and they call them game wreckers for a reason because they could not get a sack, but they're affecting what the offense is calling. They're affecting, what the tight end's route is, right? As I just mentioned, so. I think you have to have a guy, man. And I know it's so hard to find, but I think you go for it. It's like, it's like going for the quarterback position, right? In my opinion, I think it's that important, and that you have to just kind of go for it and to change a defense, to change a team. And I think if you can somehow, some way find one, you got to go for it. You got to go nutso, as you said, Matt.
You got to balance the need that's there.
Yeah.
With also the urgency that we've talked about.
Yeah, we heard it on
right? As a franchise. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if the Colts do.
I would not be at all. I'm all in on it because I think it could really be a game changer.
Yeah. I mean, that's some conversation for later on in the offseason. Once we get closer to free agency, we'll talk about some of the specific names at that position that might be out there and what it would take to bring those guys in to lure them over to the Colts. Speaking of free agency, Jack, I mean, from the sounds of it, there's a lot of reason to think that there's mutual interest in reuniting Daniel Jones and the Colts within this offense for next year. Obviously he's going to be rehabbing that Achilles all off season, but I mean, based on what you saw in the first 10 games pre-fibula, I mean, he was playing incredibly strong and he meant a lot to this offense. So how much mutual interest do you think there should be after what you saw this year from Daniel Jones, right? I know it's easy to say after the season's over on locker clear-out days, like, yeah, I'd like to come back.
Yeah, right.
I mean, that's kind of a canned response.
Yeah.
But how much really, in reality, should Daniel Jones want to come back here?
Yeah, I think he definitely wants to come back here. And I think the first thing that comes to mind is his relationship with Shane. And again, I wasn't in the, I'm not in the locker, I'm not in the meetings, but just, observing from afar and seeing how well they connected and, saw the game the same way. And again, Shane got the best out of Daniel and Daniel got the best out of Shane, right? So, I think the mutual interest should be high. And obviously Daniel, speaking from a player's perspective, he's got to go through the whole free agency process, right? And he's going to say, defer to my agent, and there's going to be suitors out there for this guy. Even though he's coming off the Achilles,
I agree.
How high high level he played, and like we've talked about, Matt, how desperate are teams to get a quarterback, right? I mean, so you got to be ready to ante up, in my opinion, right? Because I think it's a no-brainer to bring Daniel back, and there's the things we hear about him and the things you've seen from him. There's not a guy that's going to work harder in the rehab process and get himself ready to play. And I know coming off an Achilles, I've never experienced that, and it's a really tough deal. But I think this is a smart guy who knows his body well, and he's honestly kind of like a genetic freak. And I think people forget about this dude's a dude, man. I bet he's
athletic.
He's athletic. He's strong, right? So yeah, I think again, you don't want to relying on an Achilles guy coming off Achilles is tough, but I think Daniel will handle the process the right way.
Well, Chris said that he sees short-term success, and maybe Daniel Jones is the long-term answer at quarterback. I mean, those are his words.
Yeah. How old's Daniel?
He's
28. Sorry to put you on the spot.
27, 28.
Yeah.
I mean, I know he's less than 30.
Yeah.
So he's got some great years ahead of him.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Quarterback, you can play till 35. I mean, we'll say 35. That's a high lower.
Yeah.
Philip 44, but
Tom Brady too.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it just depends on what your goals are there. But my point is, you hear the GM say that, and then the two teams that immediately come to my mind, at the Vikings, who I think are a quarterback away.
And he was there for a minute.
Yeah. I think, their coaching staff really appreciated what Daniel Jones was and could be. And same thing maybe with the Steelers. We'll see, they're out of the playoffs now, and this whole Aaron Rodgers saga.
Yeah, that's one I haven't really.
Again.
That's one I haven't really thought about.
Yeah,
that's good.
But I mean, I think they're probably thinking to themselves, we're a long-term stable quarterback away from really having success. Even though everybody wants to run inexplicably Mike Tomlin out of town, because all the guy does is win and produce winning seasons and avoid missing the playoffs and things like that. But that's neither here nor there. My point is, I wouldn't be shocked, Jack, to see Daniel Jones lock it up with the Colts prior to the new league year starting and free agency hitting.
Yeah, speaking from the Colts' perspective, I think that'd be a good call, right? And again,
even with him coming off the injury,
even with him coming off the injury, again, and I think, like we've talked about, Matt, and the mutual interest is really there. And I think Daniel, he obviously had a career resurgence here, and again, the connection he made with Shane, I think, is going to play a big part in all this.
All right, we're talking quarterbacks now. Speaking of that, what'd you think of Riley Leonard?
I thought Riley did a great job. I mean, he's fun to watch, right? He's exciting. Obviously, he had a couple, what do you want to call them, rookie mistakes or things like that. But what I was most impressed with was him throwing it from the pocket, man. He completed some balls, and, Alec Pierce was balling, right, per usual, right? But it was really cool to see him make some plays with his legs. And I was really impressed with Riley's effort in that last game in Houston.
Yeah, I mean, he really showed you some stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not being critical at all. Don't get it twisted. I'm not being critical at all of the decision to go to Phillip Rivers in the last 3 or 4 games, right? I thought that was the right move. I really did. But isn't it kind of funny how we're just sort of afraid, I think just as football people, we're just kind of afraid of the unknown.
Yeah.
And Riley Leonard was a little bit of an unknown when you're trying to make the playoffs and you still have playoff chances. You know, like the math says we can still get in. So let's bring in Phillip Rivers, who has all of this experience. And then when you're eliminated, all right, let's see what Riley Leonard can do.
Yeah.
Right? It's just kind of like you're just kind of there's a little bit of trepidation there when you don't have a full picture. You've got a lot of unknown when the game or the season's on the line. And my point is, I think Riley Leonard proved a lot of people wrong.
Yeah.
Or showed more than what people thought he could do as a rookie.
Well, he earned trust, right?
Yeah.
As we talked about, every coach, and they're all wired the same, right? They're going to play who they trust, you know, and that's part of the reason. I know Riley had a knee or whatever coming out of that Jacksonville game,
Right.
and that played into bringing Phillip in. But coaches are going to play who they trust, right? And Shane trusts Phillip, right? And that's why they went that way, and Riley had Riley had an opportunity, right, to really earn that trust, but he had a great opportunity down there in Houston to again, this is a little notch on his resume, right, and what you can do out there, so yeah, he earned some trust in this coaching staff for sure, and earned some trust. For me watching him play,
Yeah.
I was really impressed.
Yeah, I think he just showed some people what he can actually do.
Yeah, competitor, man.
I don't think people really realized all the things that he could do, primarily in that first half against a bona fide defense that was playing all out in the first half from the Texans.
Yeah, I mean, again, like the deep ball, the deep ball throws. We saw that a little bit in Jacksonville, and I think we talked about it. I remember when he came in for Daniel in the second half, throwing that deep ball. But again, I was most impressed. I knew Riley could get out and make plays with his legs and extend plays and things like that. But
Right.
there was a few times he converted some third downs from the pocket and and standing there and delivering an accurate ball. So yeah, good for him for he's been preparing for that moment since. Probably he was 5 years old, right, to be an NFL starting quarterback and get that opportunity, and then it went well for him. So yeah, I was really happy for him.
All right, lastly on the quarterbacks, the Colts have until May when it comes to Anthony Richardson and that decision to pick up his fifth-year option. We know he finished the year on IR, Week 6 pregame against the Cardinals, the freak accident, right, the whatever you want to call it, the mechanism that's actually hosting the stretch band,
Yeah.
comes disengaged and it hits him in the face. I mean, just a scary thing, but he's having these lingering vision issues in his right eye, and he told reporters there towards the end of the season that he's still kind of struggling handling snaps inside practice. So they activated him, or they put him on the 21-day window, never activated him towards the end of the season, and so finishes the year on IR, and he only played in a handful of games this year. So what do you think Richardson's immediate future is, right? If the Colts bring back Jones and have that trust and faith in him, we just talked about what Riley Leonard can potentially be and how viable of a backup quarterback he could be going into 2026. Mm-hmm. What does this mean for Anthony Richardson?
Yeah, I don't know. Obviously, the first concern is Anthony's health and getting, hopefully, finding ways or getting the rest or whatever it's going to take to kind of get that vision.
Improve the eyesight.
Yeah, improve the eyesight so that he's back to full strength, and thoughts and prayers with him for that, because that what a scary deal. Like you said, a freak accident, and then to still have some lingering issues going on is that's got to be really frustrating for Anthony. From his perspective to deal with. But yeah, I don't know. I think, listening to Shane and Chris kind of talk about again that, the first concern was his health. And, but again, let's say Daniel Jones is re-signed, right? And, you had Riley played really well, but Daniel is still coming off an Achilles, right? So I think Anthony, I think there still is a place there, right, in preparing into next season, depending on how, Daniel's rehab goes and things like that. So yeah, but yeah, obviously the first concern is his health and hoping that the eyesight can come back to normal.
Tangent, but again, if total hypothetical, we're probably getting way ahead of ourselves.
Yeah, this is fun though.
But if Daniel Jones comes back, and you have Riley Leonard and Anthony Richardson still on the roster. Last year, the buzzword was it really started around the combine. It was, we're going to have a competition. Mm-hmm. We're going to push these guys. Is there a competition at quarterback if Daniel Jones does come back?
If Daniel Jones comes,
is it that emphatic this offseason compared to last?
If Daniel Jones comes back, Daniel Jones is the starting quarterback. I mean, right? I mean, that's, and I think the money will show that. That's the way that goes in the NFL, right? There's still competition, right? And you got to play.
Talks.
You got to play. You got to play well. But Daniel will get the opportunity to when he's healthy, right, to start the season. But
I agree.
There could be a competition, Riley and Anthony. If it goes that way, and Daniel's not
kind of trickles down a notch.
Daniel's not ready for the start of the season.
Right.
Who knows how all that shakes out? Again, we're like you said, we're hypotheticals and getting ahead of ourselves, but that's what we're here for to talk, and that's what makes
Hot
it fun.
Stove stuff, right? This time of year. Welcome to January, right? All right, Jack. To close out, I do want to talk about the playoffs. The playoffs have been highly entertaining. More often than not, we've seen some great games, a lot of fourth quarter lead changes, a lot of back and forth. The 2025 wild card round produced 4 games decided by 5 points. The Rams beat the Panthers by 3. Bears over the Packers by 4. What a wild game that was. God. Bills over the Jags by 3. And 49ers beat the Eagles by 4. So as it relates to the Colts and, their struggles down the stretch, what have you learned about playoff football and what that means for the Colts and their quest to get back to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's one-score games, right? And you got to finish. I mean, so many of those games, like the stats of how many points were scored in the final 8 minutes of some of those games is just insane, right? It was like, especially, the Bears-Packers game, I got home late and we were able to turn that one on, and it's like, it's 21-6, nothing's really happening, right? And then boom, they start lighting it up, and it was the week before with the Steelers and Ravens. I know that wasn't a playoff game, but it was the same kind of thing. The last 8 minutes, it goes crazy. So, it shows that the NFL is going to be one-score games. The Colts, obviously that's a key area that they want to improve in, right? I think Shane will put those guys in somehow, some way. That's his job as a head coach, to put those guys in that situation. Coming into OTAs, coming into training camp next year, and finding ways to make competitions in that way to improve that area for the Colts.
How about this one? 4 of the 5 wild card games before Monday night. So really, it's 4 out of 6. 4 out of 6 featured a team who won that was trailing with less than 3 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. And that's an area where the Colts really struggled as well. And Chris hit that at the end of the season, right? In his end-of-the-year press conference, he said, we got to finish games. We got to find ways to win close games, but we also have to be better in end-of-half and end-of-game situations. I mean, against the Chiefs, Seahawks, and Texans, the Colts gave up the game-tying or go-ahead field goals in the final 30 seconds of regulation. And during their 7-game losing skid at the end of the year, I looked this up the other day just to drive home the point, the Colts allowed 40 points in the final 2 minutes of halves and games.
Yeah, that's huge.
Which was the 3rd worst mark in the NFL in the last 7 games of the season. I mean, that's it right there.
That's huge, man. God, that's a stat. Situational football, right? I mean, it's always – that's what the NFL is. It's who wins third down, who wins red zone, who wins turnovers, who wins in a half, who wins in a game. That's who wins the game. Just look at those things and how you can get the you get the double. I love the double score, right? You score right before half, then you get the ball. I think that's huge, right?
Yeah.
And there's so many different situations, and being able to win situational football, that's what every team's harping on. So who can harp on it the most and figure out a way to figure it out.
Yeah, playoffs roll on. Divisional matchups this weekend. I think the wild card round and the divisional matchups, when you have multiple games Saturday and Sunday, I think those are the best weekends of the year.
Well, this was the best 5 days. The Colts weren't playing, so that stunk. But it was, college football semifinal Thursday. Yeah. You got to watch your Hoosiers college football semifinal on Friday, and then playoff football Saturday, playoff football. I was this is the best 5 days of the year, right? I'm not turning my TV off.
I'm not going anywhere.
Nope. Sorry, I'm busy.
That's when you do all your shopping on Amazon, so you don't have to leave, right? One click, right? All right, to wrap up, if you're new to the podcast, we always have fun with Jack, get to know him a little bit better. We call it You Don't Know Jack. You don't know Jack Doyle in the personal sense. You know him as the football player. But here's your question this week as we get to know you a little bit better, Jack Doyle, to close out the show. Today I want to know, Jack, who was your favorite player, non-Colts teammate related? So you can't name a Colts teammate.
T.Y. Hilton. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it can't be T.Y. We know your affinity for T.Y. But who was your favorite non-Colts teammate player in the NFL when you played, and why?
Yeah, that's good. So I always had an appreciation for all the tight ends, right? And watching the tight ends, and then there's so many names come to mind. I was lucky enough that I got to play with my career started. I did my OTAs and training camp. So this is a Titans teammate, I guess. I was with Delaney Walker for a little bit, and it was great learning from him, and he taught me a lot and was a heck of a football player. He blocked, he moved around, right? I loved his game. So it was fun learning from him, and Ryan Fitzpatrick happened to be the backup for Locker when I was in Tennessee, so I got to learn a lot from Fitz. Was kind of my, I was running with the two. So
did he have the beard back then?
Oh yeah, and he was kind of, he was feeding.
I thought the beard came later.
He was feeding me the ball. It wasn't what it is right now. You see on Amazon Prime, but Fitz was feeding me the ball and was a great helper for me. He was kind of similar to what Hasselbeck was. I know I'm not allowed to say Colts teammates, but what Hasselbeck was when I got here, right? But there's so many tight ends. I grew up loving Jason Witten. So it was fun to, I remember we played against them in a preseason game. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to go up to him after the game and be like, oh, dude. And I remember, he's sitting there talking to, Brian Schottenheimer, him were talking, and I go, probably interrupt the conversation, right? And I just kind of he's looks at me, and I'm just
I like you.
Yeah, good football, sir. Thank you.
You're intimidated by Jason Witten.
You don't know how much I've watched you play football and love the way you play. So
I'm sure he really appreciate that, though.
Yeah. There's so many guys, right? And I got to give a shout out. One more. Sorry, I'm rambling on people here, but my guy Tyler Higbee, playing tight end for the Rams. He's a Western Kentucky guy, Hilltopper, so we got to stick together, and he's battled through some things, and he had a couple catches this past weekend, so always pulling for my guy Tyler.
I like it. Yeah, Fitzpatrick's a great one. Just follow the smart guys. Follow the guys.
Yeah. They
can't go wrong there in the Ivy League.
Fitz was the man. He probably got me claimed here, right? I mean,
really? How so?
Just feeding me the ball in the preseason games, right?
Okay.
I mean, and then I think Gregson said it was more for my blocking. They were going to throw it to me here early, anyways. But I got to play a lot early on, and a credit to Fitz, and he gave me a lot of confidence, right? You go through that first training camp as a rookie. There's things, it's. And I'll say this: training camp was a little harder back then, right? And we're in full pads a lot more, and there's back in my day, in 2013. But there's there were some days, some rookie moments and things like that. But he helped install confidence in me, and kept always had a positive mindset and an optimistic look on things. So yeah, really appreciate him.
Do you remember how many balls you caught that preseason down in Tennessee?
Oh, I don't know. I like Matt. You always
4 games.
You think of 4 games, and played a lot because Delaney was hurt. They had Craig Stevens, who was another great tight end, a great blocker, and a great guy. Yeah. So guys were playing. What I do remember. I'll tell a funny story from my first preseason. So I dropped I got in with the ones because some couple guys were hurt.
Sure.
Dropped a shallow route from Locker. The first third down of the game. I was in with and I was my career's over. I'm lose. But what it did is I blocked my off the rest of the game. Yeah. And when the Colts claimed me, Ryan Grigson, he watched that preseason game and said, we signed you because I saw the way you blocked against, James Harrison was there, and the way you play, and it's oh, that's probably because I dropped a ball and was really teed off, right? And
I gotta make it up.
And made it up for it by blocking. So it's funny how it all works out. But yeah, that's a little preseason Jack
going
story.
Down memory lane with Jack Doyle and his favorite non-Colts teammates. I love it right there. That's You Don't Know Jack. We do know Jack. He's gonna be back with us. We're gonna be doing this podcast kind of bi-monthly here in the off season. All right, so you can't get rid of us that easy. But we'll be checking back in closer to combine time and periodically before free agency, just kind of check points on what's going on with the Indianapolis Colts, looking to get better here this offseason, trying to erase the bad taste of the 8-9 season here in 2025. Jack, this is a blast, man.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, thanks, Matt.
Absolutely. Jack Doyle, I'm Matt Taylor. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And we'll be back soon here on the Colts Podcast channel. So long, everybody.